The home brewery at night. There's nothing quite like it. The smell of fermentation permeates the air. The subtle sound of an airlock bubbling in the distance, and the taste of a crisp homebrew on the lips. It's nights like this that keep me searching for that perfect beer recipe. But tonight, there's something different in the air. The smell of a problem. A homebrew problem. And she's about to walk through that door. My name? Trent Musho, and they call me Detective BruSho. Let's solve homebrew problems. There she was, a dame with a problem. I could see by the look in her eyes, she had it bad. I asked her to cut to the chase. What's the matter, doll? She started off by telling me an issue she's been having, one of great gravity. She told me she's been having issues hitting her original gravity, sometimes too high, sometimes too low. It's actually quite a common issue, and luckily can be resolved easily. First, you gotta understand your system. Depending on your brewery, you're gonna have a different efficiency, or how much extraction of sugars you might get out of a given amount of grains, and how much work you can get into that fermenter. Knowing your efficiency percentage will greatly help you hit a consistent original gravity. Several factors can impact your efficiency. First, in the mash, a finer crush can lead to a higher mash efficiency, overall raising the amount of sugars in your wort. Then in the boil, you have to consider your losses, like boil-off rate, trub losses, and dead space losses when transferring into a fermenter. All of those, combined with your mash efficiency, give you your brewhouse efficiency, which typically ranges around 65 to 75%. But you can't know this without brewing a few times to figure it out. And once you have a rough estimate based on your system, you can plug it into the software and start hitting more accurate OGs. But let's say you just have a fluke, like the broad that walked into my office, and your OG is randomly too low. That's where you say hello to our little friend DME. Dry malt extract is your partner in crime. If you find yourself a few points under, tossing in a pint of DME can help raise up that gravity. Sure, you can do some math to figure out the exact amount, but smarter Joes than me made these handy calculators to get you the right numbers. But don't worry, this isn't cheating. Pro brewers are even known to do this to keep things consistent. And as long as you aren't adding pounds and pounds of the stuff, you shouldn't have to worry about flavor or color swings too much. Now on the other hand, if your OG is too high, well, that's a problem too. It usually means you've condensed your wort a bit too much, meaning you're probably low on volume as well. No fear, just add some distilled or RO water and raise up that volume, while lowering that OG to the right range. You definitely don't want to use tap water. It's got all kinds of chemicals in it, so stick with the clean stuff. And you want to add the water before fermentation starts. Adding it after introduces oxygen, and you know what oxygen does to your finished beer, right? There's also some handy calculators for this dilution process too, so use those and save yourself a headache. And don't worry, it won't dilute the flavor. This is also very common at the big breweries and works like a charm. I could tell the dame was pleased with the answer, but I could sense something was still wrong. What's it now, baby? Shoot. This time she went on about a recent fermentation, where it all started out fine, and then went completely sideways. It was like any other fermentation. Brew day went off without a hitch. She dumped the yeast and let it ride. But after a few short days, the bubbling activity halted. She checked the gravity, and lo and behold, it was less than halfway from its expected final gravity, a stuck fermentation. There can be many reasons for a fermentation to stop short. The first that comes to mind is not enough yeast. If you pitch too small of a yeast colony, they can only handle so much before they become overwhelmed and start dying off before finishing the job. Also, not having the right amount of nutrients can cause issues with the fermentation. Yeast health is a major factor for minimizing off flavors and ensuring your fermentation goes smoothly. Definitely consult a yeast picture calculator, especially if you're making really big beers or using fresh packs of yeast that tend to have lower cell counts. Making a yeast starter is never a bad idea for prepping that yeast to perform and get things started with a bang. If you do have a stuck fermentation, There are a few things you can do to salvage it. First is to really be sure you have a stuck fermentation, and not just a finished beer. Some yeasts just finish high, or maybe you brewed a huge pastry stout. Your final gravity is going to be much higher than a low ABV Pilsner. Take the gravity reading with the hydrometer, or if you use a refractometer, be sure to use a conversion calculator, as refractometers aren't accurate alone once alcohol is around. One other trick is to do a forced fermentation test. This is where you carefully pull a sample of your beer and place it into a small container. Then add a good helping of yeast, shake it up, and place it somewhere very warm. Within a couple days, test that sample's gravity to see if it drops. By then, it should hit the final gravity. If it doesn't move, then your beer is done, and probably a sign that you miscalculated or mismeasured along the way. But if it drops, then you got a stuck fermentation, and you need to take the next steps. First option is to raise the temp of your fermenter. Yeast are more active when it's warm, and that might be all they need to get going again. But if that doesn't work, try adding in more of the yeast you used, but don't just drop it into the fermenter. Make a nice big starter and make sure it's very active. Then pitch it in. This should give your beer the kick in the pants it needs to get started. The look in her eyes said it all. She knew what to do now. My job was about done when she whispered, "But there's one more thing." She knew I was ready for whatever it was, and she let me have it. A story about a bottle of brew that wasn't quite carbonated. Or was it? Packaging beer is the last stage before you get to put back the delicious cold one. And after all that hard work, the last thing you want is for your beer to be flat. Or even worse, overcarbonated and exploding all over the apartment like a Chicago typewriter. Sure, kegging solves a lot of those issues, but bottling is the way of a new brewer. So how do you know when the carbonation is just right? It all starts with knowing the right amount of sugar to add, also known as priming sugar. Adding sugar into bottles restarts fermentation, creating pressure in the bottles and thus bubbles. But you can't just be tossing in random amounts of sugar or relying on prefabricated sugar drops to get an accurate carb level. You gotta use a priming sugar calculator. It takes into consideration your desired pressure level, volume of beer, and lastly, and most importantly, the temperature of your brew. And I'm not talking about the temp now. I'm talking about the highest temp that your fermentation reached. This is an important distinction because that temp determines how much dissolved CO2 is in your beer and will impact the amount of sugar needed. So try and track that temp. Once you're bottled up with the sugar added, you just gotta wait. It can take up to 2 weeks. But if you're like me and like knowing how far along things are, I got a tip. Bottle up one into a plastic bottle, something that can hold pressure like a sparkling water or soda bottle. As it sits and re-ferments, you can feel the pressure build and the bottle stiffen up. And once you feel like it's at the right stage, you can toss it in the fridge to chill and try it out. If it's right, then get all those other bottles in the icebox and start enjoying. While they're cold, they'll last longer and they won't get overcarbed as quickly. But hopefully your precise sugar additions will keep them from getting overcarbed as well. There was a stillness to the air. I sensed the dame had gotten what she was here for. "That's all I got, honey. Be sure to come back again sometime soon." She smirked and blew me a kiss. Another job well done. When suddenly, a fatal blow. She sure had gotten what she came for, and left with it in a dash. All alone. And all I could smell was gunpowder. No more yeasty ferments in the air, and no more sounds of airlocks bubbling. I guess detective work ain't what it's cracked up to be. But at least I got my beer. Good to the last drop.